Everyone remembers the 1980s differently. But for many Singaporeans, the decade could be summed up in one word: progress. In the 80s, Singapore reinvented itself on all fronts. Singapore was open for business, and the world was starting to take notice. From crisis to celebration, the 80s brought a new social consciousness and a clearer understanding of what it meant to be an independent nation. The 1980s were a decade of progress for Singapore. If the 70s saw Singapore working hard to woo much-needed foreign investment, then the first half of the 80s were its honeymoon years. The Lion City became an Asian tiger, one of 4 countries in the region whose economies were fiercely transformed during this period. Singapore's roar was heard overseas, and foreign money continued to roll in.
Jobs on the rise, with new developing companies, coming in. So the opportunities were thriving, definitely.
In the early 80s, low unemployment and relatively high wages made Singapore the envy of the region. Singaporeans left the challenges of the past behind for a better life.
Life was, I guess, hopeful. My parents and the previous generations did all the hard work. So I think it was, boom time in Singapore, and we were starting to be a bit more fluent.
Many Singaporeans went from slogging it out just to make ends meet to having more disposable income for some of life's little pleasures. Orchard Road, Singapore's main shopping street, would in the 80s undergo a serious upgrade. Flashy new malls, commercial buildings, and hotels. This street became a symbol of Singapore's growing affluence and a draw for locals and tourists alike.
Prior to that, it was really nothing much along the area. Shortly after, suddenly this shopping mall comes up, East Plaza, with the bubble lift up in the front. Back then, everyone was like, wow, lift with glass, you can look down. And you get long queues of people trying to just, ride the elevator. It was quite funny. And yeah, it's just a lot air-conditioned, multiple floors with shops that attract, all kinds of people.
With the malls came a new kind of subculture. Bands of youngsters with imaginative haircuts and outfits to match. They weren't violent for the most part, but they did earn a reputation for shoplifting, underage smoking, and glue sniffing. Depending on the mall they favored, they were either the Far East Kids or the Centrepoint Kids. These places were where the cool kids of the 80s chilled.
There is a definite identity, dress style, for certain select groups in each of these specific malls. I guess it was just a reflection of what was really going on in the rest of the world, with the pop culture blowing up, this subculture for kids. I feel had a connection with pop artists and pop groups. So certain groups kind of wanted to look like their idols, right? Pop idols, so they kind of dress in that way.
DJ Aldrin Kwek was neither a Centrepoint nor Far East Kid, but he did hang out a lot at Far East Plaza.
There were a lot of fashion clothing, shoes, all targeted at youth. So I guess that's why it was a very exciting time for kids to be in Yeah. I mean, we may not be able to afford all the things in there, but just walking around and window shopping was a thrill itself.
Today, Far East Plaza is not the mall of Aldrin's youth. His favorite store is gone, but the mall still holds special significance for him.
I think around this corner, if I'm not mistaken.
Because this was where he found his groove.
Yeah. Yeah, this looks a bit familiar now. I think this is the one. Yeah, it used to be here. So DBX Audiophile used to be a record store here. And somehow the owner decided to gather a bunch of us kids and started a breakdance crew. And I spent most of my youth here practicing breakdancing. Most weekdays and most weekends, definitely.
In the 1980s, breakdancing was in. And it was not long before the breakers started taking over other parts of the mall.
I don't think Far East Plaza actually wanted all these kids to be breakdancing in the mall. So it was kind of like a risky business for us. I mean, you just take your chances, right? So whenever they find a space, a good enough space, and security is not around, then somebody starts breakdancing, it will attract some attention. And a small crowd will form like a circle. And then everyone will just start, throwing their moves, and it's like a semi-friendly battle until the security comes and then everyone disperses.
The rise of flamboyant Singapore mallsters and hardcore breakers represented more than just 80s pop culture trends. It reflected a willingness of some Singaporeans to step out of their comfort zones and dare to be different and to take risks. One prominent risk taker in the decade was Sim Wong Hu, an engineer in an oil company. In 1981, he poured his life savings into an ambitious project.
I saw all the computers out there, they don't have music, they don't have voice. And the line that I was in the oil survey line, happens to be dealing with acoustic data acquisition. That means converting analog signal, acoustic sound signal into digital signal. And so moving from that domain to actually computer audio and computer music is very natural.
In 1986, Sim's company launched the Cubic CT, the world's first multimedia computer. But the worst thing that can happen to a computer happened to his venture. It crashed.
It's not successful, I think, because we were overly too ambitious. We spent a lot of money in engineering. We got no money left after that for marketing. I think those customers that bought our products, they love it. They love it. They really love it. They love the Chinese, they love the music, they love the voice, they love the extra features. But they say, hey, I need more support, I need support. And that time when you do software, you can't charge. Software, people expect it to be free. We write all the software, additional software, we have to give free. Then how can you sustain a business like that?
To save his business, Sim shifted his focus to making sound cards, microchip circuits that enabled computers to play audio. In 1989, he launched Sound Blaster, promising crystal clear, high-fidelity audio, ideal for computer games. It was an instant hit when it was launched in the United States.
We were selling on the spot, so we actually have 3 rows taking orders, 3 cashiers taking orders, 20 deep, non-stop for the 5 days, non-stop. So every 4 minutes we collected 1 orders. Non-stop for that. So that was a huge success for just something very simple.
Today, 30 years after he launched Sound Blaster, Sim's creative technology is an international household name and still a world leader in sound technology.
Well, I think it certainly put Singapore on the world map with this Sound Blaster. The Sound Blaster was really ahead of time because nobody has seen something like this, a sound card that can do music, voice, everything. Oh, the Sound Blaster technology is still today in every PC. We license it to Microsoft, they put it in the operating system and it just stay there, it's grandfather inside there, which is something we're proud of.
creative success coincided with a new industrial revolution for Singapore, when productivity became the buzzword. From producing low-cost goods like textiles, local factories of the 80s churned out computers and other electronics. By the end of that decade, the city was a hub for high-tech manufacturing. There were 650 multinational corporations and over 1,000 international financial and trading firms. But to draw in even more investors, the country's infrastructure needed an upgrade. In the 1980s, Changi Airport opened. It helped Singapore attract even more international business and further elevated the Singapore brand. But it was another mega project that really got Singaporeans talking. Despite initial opposition from transport analysts, the government went full steam ahead with its ambitious subway project. In 1987, Singapore's first mass rapid transit, or MRT line, began operations. Teacher Helen Yeoh was among those on board the maiden ride.
When I took my first ride in the MRT, I felt a sense of pride because I traveled to the West. I saw the subways, and now Singapore is having it. It makes me feel like we are small, and yet we are trying. We don't want to be left out. We don't want to lose to other countries. I used to take a bus to work. And you know, buses were very crowded. And they don't really come, fast. And if they did come, sometimes you don't even manage to go up the bus. Why? So crowded. And you miss the bus. So when the MRT came, I was really definitely very happy.
That first ride was a historic moment for Helen. She's kept a physical reminder of how big a deal it was for her and the country.
This is the commemorative ticket that I had. Very interesting one. And if you flip behind, you see, it says that a nation for all, together, excellence for Singapore. And you feel proud that Singapore is progressing.
But progress, as they say, is impossible without change. As Singapore rolled out initiative after initiative, change was a near constant experience. To address the critical needs of a developing nation, some of what was had to be sacrificed. This was the cost of progress. Singapore, the modern island paradise. That's how Singapore was being sold in the 1980s to both locals and visitors. In the early part of the decade, the country was making steady progress establishing itself as a global financial center. But tourism, a key pillar of the city's economic growth, was slipping. One resident was called upon to help pull those declining numbers up. When Orangutan Amang was made poster girl for the zoo in the 1980s, she instantly became one of Singapore's most recognizable icons. And as her popularity grew, so did the number of visitors to the Republic, many of whom flocked to the island just to visit the Singapore Zoo, where she was the star attraction.
She sort of got it to a superstar status where even I remember one of our former presidents President Devanaya passed by Amang one day and stopped and said, you know, after Lee Kuan Yew, Amang is the most popular name in Singapore, you know, which was pretty cool. And she used to like command a modeling fee of like $5,000 a session for doing any kind of advertising with her. And she was used so much. Michael Jackson, like, when he came through to give his concert, is basically, he wanted to see Amang. So we took Amang down to Raffles Hotel.
Amang died in 2008. While former director Bernard Harrison is grateful to Amang for her contributions to both the zoo and Singapore tourism, he also remembers her as a petulant diva who relished VIP treatment.
And it was not a secret that she and I actually didn't get on with each other at all. I mean, she would have taken me apart limb for limb if she could have, and scattered me around the Mandai forest if she had a chance. It was actually Dr. Ong, my chairman, who created this situation where he used to come up every week, twice a week, and we used to sit with Amang. Amang would sit in the middle of us, and he would give her treats like Horlicks tablets and bananas and stuff, and it's like, go around the zoo on a tram. And this went on for years, twice a week. And so she's cool with it, you know, she liked it. It was like, from becoming a treat, it became an expected right. And then suddenly one day, Dr. Wong said, I don't want Amang. And so she would see us driving around on the same tram from the enclosure, and, you know, she kind of like got very upset. And from then onwards, every time I would go close to her, or Dr. Ong, she would kind of like get upset. And so that was like my legacy, that she was, but she's cool.
Bernard is credited with injecting new life into the zoo in the 1980s. He revamped many of the enclosures to simulate more natural animal habitats, which in turn created a more interactive experience for visitors.
On the island, can they move out to the
No, they can't.
So unless you put a bridge across.
Yeah.
But he believes it was one idea in particular that helped turn the zoo around, one that is still being used today.
Definitely it was setting up breakfast at the zoo, because it was such a strategic development. It suddenly put the zoo onto the tourist map. We went to about 1.3, 1.4 million visitors a year from 500,000. Not all those were tourists, but we were averaging about 30% tourists a year, which was 400,000 tourists, which is pretty impressive actually. Breakfast at the zoo, which now is jungle breakfast, really was, I think, probably the one most important thing that we ever did to promote the zoo.
Dining with animals wasn't the only wild idea that Singapore used to woo tourists. In the 1980s, they were also promoting trips to hell. Haw Villa had been around since the late 1930s and was already a popular Singapore family attraction. This large public park featured thousands of statues and dioramas depicting colorful scenes from Chinese mythology. Among them were very graphic exhibits depicting torturous consequences for sinners in the afterlife. But this was gruesome blood and gore with a practical purpose.
Haw Villa is a place that brings very strong value or culture. So a lot of parents who actually, the way they educate about the Chinese value and culture, they'll bring them to Haw Villa. The mythical stories brings life, bring a lot of value to all these visitors. They're fascinated and they really love to learn about the stories of the Chinese mythical stories itself. And that's where it caters to the masses.
Haw Villa's founders, brothers Ao Boon Haw and Ao Boon Pa, built the place to promote Chinese values. They hired Adeline's great-grandfather to maintain the park and provided his family free housing on the grounds. By the 1980s, 4 generations of her family had lived and worked in the park. She has fond childhood memories of tagging along with her father, the park's chief artisan, on his rounds.
I'm fascinated because it's not about just maintaining and painting the sculpture, because he was trained in the skills that I think is no longer exist. So he actually has to remember vividly what colors to actually put it on. And also those colors are not ready-made or bought paint. He has to mix it from the primary colors to kind of paint it to the real texture and the vibrancy of the sculptures.
At a time when there were few places for kids her age to play, Adeline and her cousins found all the entertainment they needed right here in the park.
In Haw Villa, whole entire, we call it the garden, is actually our playground. We don't have man-made slides, so some of the sculpture, the small little holes that we can find, we actually use it as our slides, me and my cousins. So the bonding is strong, the kampong spirit is there, and at the same time, we have to be very creative.
But the fun and games came to an end in 1985. In a bid to draw more visitors to the country, the Singapore Tourism Board devised plans to turn Haw Villa into a modern theme park with thrills and spills. Once again, it was in with the new and out with Adeline's family. They were relocated to a housing estate.
When Haw Villa was turned into a theme park, my dad was extremely disappointed. We don't have a lot of places to visit that's free, and the purpose is to open up to public, that you don't have to pay, but you still get to enjoy your weekend and have picnic there, have a family outing. So it's to create that family bonding too. So when it turned into a theme park, it's no longer the original old Haw Villa.
The new theme park, which came to be known as Haw Villa Dragon World, proved to be a commercial failure, and the attraction eventually returned to being a public park. While Adeline and her father appreciated regaining free access to their beloved Haw Villa, their relationship with their former home and playground was never the same again.
When we had to move out of the place, we were extremely sad because not only we lost our childhood place, our childhood playground, a house where we housed 4 generations. I feel that we also lost the way we connect with our neighbors, a kampong spirit.
This sense of loss and dislocation was also felt by others in the country. In the 80s, many of Singapore's remaining kampongs or villages were redeveloped. One of them was Kampong Santeng, which sprawled across an area the size of 180 football fields. It was home not only to 1,000 residents, but also thousands of Chinese graves, which gave the village its unique identity.
想念最好是有这个季节来了，好像那个他们的清明节、重阳节，舞狮，他们这舞狮队很强，他们舞狮就拜了，就在碧山亭一个机会，舞狮舞龙表演。
Chua Ik Chuan lived in Kampong Santeng for 46 years. before he and his fellow villagers were relocated in the 80s. They found new homes for themselves and their dearly departed. But Mr. Chua feels something precious was lost. Something that may never be recovered. Tradition.
把那个优良传统传上去，好像思念我们的先辈一些功绩啊什么，这个应该值得庆祝，因为纪念他一些就是祖先有祖先创办一些事业啦等等啦，所以一定要纪念我们那段时期。不过年轻思想又不一样了，所以就慢慢淡化消失了。我看多20-30年就差不多慢慢没有了。
Today, Kampong Santeng goes by another name, Bishan Newtown. This is one of Singapore's most developed estates. Today, in place of tombs, traditional tea houses, and kampong dwellings, stand community amenities. But the past is still present in Bishan. Kampong Santeng's legacy lives on in the Pek Santeng Memorial Park. The columbarium here houses the remains unearthed from the original cemetery. There is also a museum offering a glimpse into the rural lives of Kampong Santeng's residents.
我们的时代，但是我们就感觉到还有一个我们看得到小规模的模型啦，还可以说有这个纪念性很大，所以本来300多英亩，现在是8英亩，什么都要放，哪里放得下？
Some Singaporeans found the transition from village life to an urban lifestyle difficult. But many came to accept the redevelopment policies of the 80s as necessary for progress. But the decade also saw locals devising clever and creative ways to lament the loss of such cherished places and traditions through the arts. From mudflat to metropolis, that's been Singapore's journey. By the 1980s, Singapore had indeed become a modern global city. As more high-rise apartments and office buildings towered over the country, the island became increasingly unrecognizable to those who grew up in kampongs and kelongs. Many accepted this as part and parcel of development. But some found expression of this sense of disconnect through the arts.
A new painting by
Playwright Kuo Pao Kun was one of them. He wrote the allegorical tale, The Silly Little Girl and the Funny Old Tree. The play follows a lonely schoolgirl who misses her late grandfather and the conversations they used to have in their dialect. She befriends a tree who teaches her to explore her cultural roots. Kuo cast unknown 19-year-old actress Ang Gay Pin as the silly little girl. Now an accomplished theater director, Gay Pin has revived Kuo's classic play. The first time she read the play, she was gripped by issues she had never even thought about before.
During the 80s, we saw a lot of old kampongs gone, old buildings giving way to highways, more tall buildings. And our grandparents somehow had to move out of our kampongs and live in high-rise building. And I remember my grandparents' generation, they were watching TV or listening to radio programs, not actually, understanding any of the language. And myself, like friends and people of our generation, somehow we began slowly to not able to communicate with our grandparents. So the place somehow reflects a lot of what is happening then.
In the play's poignant conclusion, the silly little girl discovers that her beloved tree has been destroyed. It leaves her lost and distraught. In this heart-wrenching scene, Qual conveyed his message that the loss of cultural identity was the price Singapore paid for its strong focus on economic growth in the 1980s. It was a powerful theatrical moment when art reflected reality.
Some audience refused to leave the theater because we never had a curtain call. That was the first thing I remember. And then some friends, I remember they were not able to move out of the seat because they was too emotional.
While Qual's plays were designed to drive discourse, other art forms celebrated life in Singapore. The Singapore of the 80s had an exploding live music scene.
Musicians earn well. In those days, one person can get $10,000 a month actually as a salary, and bands would be able to earn up to $25,000 a month, which is, I think, very good, because today you don't even hear that, that kind of figures anymore. We had a huge variety of music, available to us, from country all the way to rock, to funk, to, pop, and we even had impersonations, entertaining bands, bands that would actually do impressions, impersonations.
But there were also musicians who felt there ought to be more to the local music scene than just cover versions of popular hits.
就是当时我们真的是年轻人只听外国的歌曲，就是台湾的、香港的，还有中国其他地方的。所以就觉得就是这一批年轻人，就是那时候感觉到，为什么我们没有自己的歌，就是没有一个自己的代表作品，所以才会有想到说，我们要寻自己的根，这样就应该从自己开始，所以他们才会开始要创作写自己新加坡的歌。
In 1982, the Sinyao movement was born, and it was all about celebrating the Singaporean identity through original Chinese music. Veteran Sinyao singer Pan Ying was groomed by legendary composer Liang Wen-fuk, one of the movement's pioneers.
以亲情、友情、家庭这些，都是占着每个人都是觉得这些都是占着非常重要的位置。所以其实新谣歌曲里面也有一些是好像新加坡派，或者是其他等等历史考试前夕，这些都是谈到一些不同的课题所以是以一般的流行歌曲来讲的话，是不太一样的。
寂静湖畔是一粒梦境。
Pan Ying still performs in Sinyao reunion concerts. She feels Sinyao still has a loyal following, but nothing like it was at its peak in the 80s.
我想归功于全部的歌手们，还有就是幕后的制作人，我们就是把我们尽上我们最好的，就每一年都呈现上最好的，所以到那个时候，我觉得是我们的黄金时期，因为每个人都拿到最好的歌曲来呈现出来。
As Sinyao became music to the ears of Chinese-speaking Singaporeans, things were also brewing on the small screen. To improve the quality of its Chinese TV dramas, the national broadcaster SBC hired directors, scriptwriters, and camera crew from Hong Kong. These seasoned professionals helped raise the bar in local TV production.
这些香港人过来之后呢，我觉得他能够帮我们在这个戏剧方面的提升呢。比如说现在我们能够走到现在，我觉得香港人的功劳啊，真的是不可以抹杀的。因为以前拍摄可能这一场戏就是一次过几个 camera 一次拍完都在 studio， 出来的东西没有那么的精彩，没有那么的好看，没有那么的生活化。把香港人过来，在剧本这方面，在拍摄这方面，他教会了很多新加坡人。
Wong Yiqing has been acting in Singapore TV dramas for more than 3 decades, playing over 200 characters.
我看到洞，我又看到3个人。好。
But he'll always be remembered for that role that propelled him to stardom. In 1983, Yiqing was cast in The Flying Fish, a drama series about a young professional swimmer.
怎么样？不服气？要不要比一比？好，怎么比？
The producers packaged and promoted Yiqing as an idol for the younger generation. He became a major local celebrity.
要永远记得，你们的身份跟我们工作人员都是一样，不要以为来这边是要出名的。当我拍完小飞鱼，可以说是很多人都认识我了，但是我还是不在乎，我还是会去搭 bus， 我不把自己看得哇，我是红人，我没有，所以呢。 我去到哪里，我都不在乎人家是用什么样的眼光看着我。
80s TV shows were also used to promote core values among Singaporeans. The showrunners sought to inspire viewers to realize their full potential. And with historic dramas such as The Awakening, which Yiqing also starred in, they tried to evoke a sense of appreciation for the sacrifices made by the earlier generations of Singaporeans.
如果我没有拍这个戏，可能我也对新加坡的了解是一点点呢。但是因为我拍了这个戏，加上故事人，加上这个资料的收集，让我更加了解到新加坡之前是。 怎么苦过来的？是怎么从一个小岛、一个钢蹦发展成今天的这么一个现代化的国家
？In the 1980s, Singaporeans may not have lived through the hard times presented on screen, but they did have an awakening of their own. When a series of disasters rocked the nation. The 80s introduced many technological innovations to Singapore. The Walkman, the Game Boy, the personal computer, and the VCR. Once again, new tech changed the way they lived, worked, and played. The 80s also gave Singapore its 10 millionth cable car passenger. The cable car system linking Singapore to Sentosa Island had been around since 1974. It was a popular airborne means to get to the resort island and back. But former Air Force crewman Hua Kim Hai's experience of this attraction was anything but fun. On the evening of January 29, 1983, Kim Hai was off duty when he was called in for a mission that would change his life forever.
When we were at the base, we were call into the briefing room. We have a mission briefing. That's when we know that we are going to do something that is we have never did before. It's out ordinary, and we have to prepare for the worst. That we may have to perform a mid-air rescue at Sentosa cable car. a few cable cars. There's some people trapped inside there, and that's when we know that a tragic accident has really happened.
The accident was caused by the Enuitok, a Panamanian oil rig which became entangled with the cable car's ropeway. The cable snapped and 2 cars plunged into the sea, killing 7 passengers. 4 more cars dangled precariously, nearly 100 meters above. Kim Hai was in the first of 2 helicopters that were dispatched to rescue the 13 trapped passengers. It was one of the most difficult operations of his military career.
The pilot in command, Colonel Kao, was having a difficult time to keep the helicopter steady position. He was drifting a little bit here and there. That's why when I go in, I about to open the cable car, I was flung away. And also because of the strong wind, the heavy downwash that caused challenges for me to get the people out from there. But after some time, the Colonel Kao managed to get a good reference. He stayed there. I opened the door, get in. Within 30 seconds, I stopped the first New Zealand tourist and get out of the cable car. That's where we became more confident that the subsequent one will be easier for us to execute the next rescue. I picked up total of 6 trapped passengers in the cable car, of which 2 is a New Zealand tourist and 4 Singaporeans.
Singaporeans again stood up to be counted on in the face of the 1985 financial crisis. And again, when Hotel New World collapsed in 1986, people from all walks of life came together to help those most affected. Surviving such adversities made Singapore stronger. To celebrate this growing unity and to lift spirits, the Singapore government began commissioning national songs in 1985.
There was a time when trouble seemed too much for us to take, but we did.
Any songwriter given that task would know immediately it had to be universal. You know, it had to have a theme like that. It had to be simple enough, you know, very few words to remember, but those words were always encapsulating what the message would have been, the main message, because it's always taking a big idea and making it small and making it easy and simple and palatable. And it had to be a style which was inclusive.
One national song in particular did all that.
National Day. Count on me, Singapore. Let's show that Singapore can count on us and sing along with Clement Chow.
The main message is exactly what it is, you know. Count on Me Singapore basically looks to an individual, you know, and says, hey, you know, you need to do your part, be able to be a part of all that we're trying to do, and we can count on you as a citizen of Singapore. Because we can do it together. And music, like I say, is not a preaching tool, it's a reaching tool, you know, and it reaches a community of people.
In the 80s, Singaporeans didn't just sing their hearts out, they also cheered their lungs out. This was Malaysia Cup football fever. Fandi Ahmad was, and still is, a Singapore sporting icon and a rallying figure in the local football scene.
It was very electrifying, especially in the stadium, you know. I mean, all sport were coming up in those days, you know, and especially football during the Malaysia Cup days. Every week, at least 50,000-60,000 people at the National Stadium. And that's the best time because you can see so many fans, so many people from different races, you know. That was our greatest motivation, you know, seeing full house every weekend.
But in the early 1980s, Singapore's favorite soccer son left the country to play for FC Groningen in the Dutch League. To his surprise, many Singaporeans supported his decision to leave for Holland. They were proud that Fundy was the first Singapore player to make it to a professional foreign club.
I am thankful to all the fans who supported me those days. You know, it's not easy, but I have to try, you know, make a living. Because since young, I wanted to play football, not knowing there is a professional, you know, football in Asia. There's nothing. And an opportunity for me to play in Europe, to express my talent, and I did that there.
At a time before cable TV and online streaming, Singaporeans followed Fundy's overseas career with keen interest. They cheered alongside Groningen fans when Fundy made history in 1983 by becoming the first Singaporean to score in the renowned UEFA League during a match against the fabled Inter Milan.
A chance for Fandi Ahmad, yes, and he puts this beyond doubt there. Fandi Ahmad, the Singapore boy, making his European...
That year was very satisfying for me because, and I got the best player for Groningen in the first year. That was my best moment, and because of the support that they given me, was fantastic. You know, the fans, they are almost, you know, like a family to the team. They come there, they watch, and it always motivates you to do better. Even though sometimes, you know, you're not 100%, but you always try to give your best.
That, in a nutshell, is how best to describe Singapore in the 80s. It was the decade of putting one's best foot forward. From reinventing manufacturing, to making the nation's voice heard overseas,
Number 11 says,
to achieving shared goals. The 80s put Singapore in high gear, building up momentum for even more rocket-fueled progress in the decades to come. The Lion City had begun to soar.